manejo de la canopia, poda, nutrición vegetal, plantaciones en doble densidad y alta densidad, reducción del tamaño de árboles, injertación, riego y control de plagas. Es el especialista en el fondo que todo productor de avellano europeo estaría feliz de recibir en su huerto por su experiencia en Estados Unidos. Nick, can you hear me?
Yes.
Nick, well, the audience is now watching you, so I already presented you to them, so the audience is all yours.
Okay. Thank you. Gracias. Well, I appreciate that introduction. Apologies that this is a presentation in English, and I'll try to speak relatively slowly. But yeah, I was invited to give a presentation. I was supposed to be with you in Chile, but unfortunately that could not be. So this is the next best thing. So here I am virtually. I was just going to give an overview of a little bit about hazelnut agronomics in Oregon, and I was hoping to cover these topics. I'm not sure if I'll have time to get to everything here, but I was going to start out today talking about just an overview of the hazelnut industry in Oregon, some information about the varieties that we grow, a little bit about our planting practices, how we manage fertility, and then something about our insects and diseases. If you are not familiar with where I'm coming from geographically, this is the United States, the state of Oregon, and about 99% of the U.S. hazelnut crop is produced in a valley within Oregon called the Willamette Valley. So here we have about only 1 degree of latitude, so it's relatively small compared to the production area in Chile. So we're at between about 44 and 45 degrees north latitude. And I know like Chian is -36 and Osorno is -40, so much bigger range of hazelnut production in Chile compared to Oregon. We have mostly family farms. There's about 900 to 1,000 hazelnut growers. We have about 100,000 acres planted now. It's been growing quite a bit. I'll show you a little bit about that. Not quite as fast as Chile, but substantial growth. So we're at about 40 hectares of hazelnuts. We have a lot of land left in the Willamette Valley. About the total agricultural land available is about 600,000 hectares. And so we have quite a bit of room for growth, and I think we will continue to see growth of the hazelnut industry. About 66% of our acreage, though, has been planted in the last 10 years. So we have a lot of young orchards. And as you'll see, we have a lot of new varieties that we're still learning about. Our crop size keeps increasing. Last year we had what was a record for us, so almost 97,000 tons. And then this year we're in progress with harvest right now, so we're expecting about 116,000 tons. We're having a good year. Prices are good. Farmers are very happy, except for this week it's been raining a lot, and so that's a big problem for us. Is we get into our rain season in the fall, sometimes in the middle of harvest. Just a little bit about how our industry works. We have 6 major exporters or packers, and then most of these packers have satellite receiving stations that are stationed throughout the Willamette Valley. And these are the receiving stations do the washing and the drying of the nuts. They also provide the growers with their grade reports on the level of defects on their nuts, and they provide storage for the packers. And a recent change has been a transition from totes or big wooden boxes to hold the nuts to dealing more with bulk harvest. So you can see in one of these images, there's a big semi-truck, a belly truck full of nuts. So that's kind of been a transition, is going to more bulk. We are an old industry, so We've had hazelnuts in the Willamette Valley since the late 1800s, and we still have some of what we would consider sort of legacy mature acres of orchard. And these are really big trees, and we have roughly 20,000 acres of this. So these would be trees that are 50 to 100 plus years old. Most of these orchards, though, are going to be heavily diseased with terrible disease of hazelnut that we have in North America called Eastern filbert blight. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. So, of the legacy varieties, we're talking about Barcelona, Casina, some Ennis, and a variety called Willamette, which is one of the first Oregon State University hazelnut releases. So, if you're not aware, we have a pretty prominent hazelnut breeding program at Oregon State University. It was founded by Maxine Thompson, pictured at the bottom there. And Sean Mellenbacher is probably the one that you know best. He's still around, but semi retired. And then Dave Smith and Becky McCluskey also worked in the program. They're also retired now. And we just hired a new breeder. So Gaurav Bhattarai, pictured at bottom right, is our new hazelnut breeder. So we have an incredible access to hazelnut genetics in Oregon, thanks to Sean's collections of hazelnuts worldwide. And what they're really breeding for, of course, is resistance to Eastern filbert blight. That's our major issue. That disease causes perennial canker in the tree, which will eventually kill the tree. So it has to be managed with fungicide applications and through pruning. So for the breeding program, their main objective is to provide us with varieties that are highly resistant to this disease that was accidentally introduced into the Willamette Valley. So most of the varieties they've released so far have had single gene resistance to the disease. A few of them have had quantitative resistance, but really our goal in the future is to have multiple resistance genes stacked into one variety for a much stronger resistance. And I'll talk briefly about kind of some things that have been going on there. Besides Eastern filbert blight resistance, what's really important to us is early maturity, so early nut drop. As I said, it's raining right now, and we're in the middle of harvest. So, as you know, the quality of the nuts goes down very rapidly when they're sitting in wet soil. The other objective is high productivity and high percentage of kernel in the varieties. So these are some of the major hazelnut releases that have come out of the breeding program. I know one that's widely planted in Chile is going to be Yamhill. That is widely planted here also. Um, so most of these varieties are for the blanched kernel market, and they typically have a really high percentage of kernel. But you can see through this list, it's complicated job on being an agronomist in this industry, given that there are about a dozen or more varieties of hazelnuts that are planted. And of course, they're all a little bit different. So when these first varieties came out into Oregon that were resistant to Eastern filbert blight, it stimulated a lot of planting, which has sort of been on the downslide lately because for the last 2 years we've had poor pricing on hazelnuts. But we expect that the rate of planting will continue to increase. But as you can see, the result of this is we have a lot of young trees in our industry. As I mentioned before, a big difference between these varieties is their vigor and their tree structure. So, further complicating the agronomic management of these varieties is this different architecture. And you can see from some of these recent releases, Yamhill is about the smallest tree, and Polio would be one of the more vigorous trees. We have now discovered that we have a mutation in this disease that is so important in our industry, and the pathogen now is overcoming the single gene resistance to Eastern filbert blight. So this has been an important change, and increasing our reliance on the breeding program to deliver us with varieties that have multiple sources of genetic resistance to eastern filbert blight. So as I mentioned, we sometimes get caught in the rains. Like right now, we've had a lot of rain this week, and of course, this messes up the harvest. Just to give you a quick idea of what the typical harvester looks like, we're mostly using California nut equipment. So here's a Flory harvester, and typically you'll see these harvesters, Flory and Weiss McNair, with a large cart behind them. And we've got quite a variety of different harvest equipment now. It's really changed a lot in the last few years. We've got more Italian equipment and some other French harvesters and different types. So one of the interesting problems that we're dealing with right now in the industry has to do with the way that most growers are planting their orchards. So they're planting at what we call double density. So this is essentially twice the number of trees that are intended to be in the orchard permanently. So for us, a typical spacing is going to be 9 by 18 feet, or roughly 3 by 6 meters. So that translates to about 665 trees per acre, which is quite a few trees. And we've got some old economic models that show that, of course, planting more trees increases the precocity or the early production of the orchard. And so it's good to allow for some cash flow in the early years of the orchard. The problem comes in to when the trees start to come into competition, and at that point, a decision needs to be made. And that decision is to remove half of the trees. And from our old economic models, really, you need to get to about 8 to 10 years after planting in order to make this system worthwhile in terms of payment. But it causes a lot of problems because a lot of growers delay the removal of the temporary trees, which results in a lot of competition in the orchard. And that can be harmful for the development of the trees too. So, a big problem that we're experiencing is that our old model for this is really doesn't really apply anymore because of the agronomic practices are more advanced now, and the trees are more productive. Our new varieties, those old models are based off of Barcelona. And so the problem is the trees are coming to competition too early. So if you have to remove your temporary trees after only 4 or 5 years in the ground, there's not going to be a big economic benefit from the double density planting. And as I mentioned, if trees are left too close together and the canopies are not heavily managed, they will grow too tall to compete for the light, and they'll become stressed and they are prone to toppling. So we've been getting these ice storms in the winter that add a lot of ice to the canopy. The ice clings onto the catkins during pollination. And when you have a tall tree, they're really prone to toppling over. There's other problems with that also, just that it's difficult to manage the canopy when it grows too tall. So we've seen this in some of our studies. So we have long-term irrigation studies of various types. I'll touch on a couple of those here, but you can kind of see this is single tree yields, and then I put it in, normally we deal in pounds per acre, but I put it into metric for this talk. But you can see how um, right there in 20 between 2021 and 2022 we thinned out these trees because they were coming into competition, and what you can see is that the production was starting to decline. And then when we removed the trees, there was really not a lot of effect, except for the total production for an orchard would go way down, even though the production on the tree level is still increasing. But the point of this is that you can see how it takes 2 years to recover after the temporary trees are removed. And actually, the production level that is attained is maybe not even as high as it was at the point where the temporary trees needed to be removed. So basically, what we see here is that these trees came into competition very early, that it's a very productive time right at the point where the temporary trees need to be removed. So this raises some questions. So here's a similar plot, but this is with a full coverage irrigation system with sprinklers. And you can see how the per tree yields don't jump much after the trees are thinned, but then they do the next year because there's a lot of growth on that tree and there's more room to grow nuts. But again, there is an incentive here to maybe see if we can keep our trees in a more of a dense hedgerow to keep the double density in place for longer, to keep the trees in that really productive stage right before they need to be thinned. So this is kind of an area of research for us agronomically, and I guess the cost of this type of a growth would be just the energy that has to be spent fighting the tree's vigor. So, by the way, we did not irrigate hazelnuts in the Willamette Valley. However, now it has become standard practice, and you can see some of the different ways that trees are irrigated. So, drip irrigation is very common, and not all growers have access to water. So, there's still quite a few orchards that have no irrigation at all. But Shown at left, you can see this subsurface drip irrigation has become very popular, where about a meter off of the trunk of the tree on either side, there would be a buried drip line. And we've shown that the trees really enjoy that type of irrigation too. We can measure lower stress levels on trees that have the subsurface compared to the drip irrigation. Something interesting that we're seeing with the irrigation is maybe it's not the same for all the varieties. So some varieties tend to benefit more from the irrigation than others, and it looks like that there's probably physiological differences between the trees that are showing different responses to irrigation. But for example, we see a huge benefit of irrigation on Jefferson, and we see a lot less benefit on McDonald and Yamhill. Kind of going hand in hand with the irrigation, we are experiencing warmer and warmer summers, and we've had some of these extreme heat events as well that have led to mass mortality of nut clusters and leaves. And so this is an active area of research for us to see how much of this we can mitigate with production best practices. So, for example, one thing we're really interested in are some of these sprayable products that might help the tree manage its water better. So, there's a lot of these on the market, and they do seem to have an effect on, for example, here you can see where these two products, one called Vapor Guard and one called the Fusion, are increasing the stomatal conductance. So in theory, they are helping the tree photosynthesize. So there's some benefits to these things. We're not 100% sure how well these work economically. Well, back to the sort of the canopy management. So a big problem for us is labor, and historically, most of our hazelnut growers are going to be doing winter pruning to manage their tree canopies, and we're trying to get them to think about some other ways to prune. And with the shortage of labor, one of the major ways that we are moving into canopy management is with big hedgers. And of course, going out in the wintertime is a great time to see how productive your orchard is going to be is indicated by the number of catkins. But one thing that really stands out is like an outside row of an orchard gets a lot more light. It's going to have more flowers. And um, compared to an inside row that's more dense. And same with the end of the tree rows. So a lot of our growers are moving in toward, I think I lost a slide here, but using big hedging machines to manage these canopies to allow more light to get into them. Well, when we're thinking about trying to keep trees smaller for longer, one technique is going to be using these hedging machines and pruning the orchard when it's green rather than in the winter time. We're looking at smaller cultivars, for example. There's a new release that's a smaller tree that's more suitable for a high density production, similar to Yamhill. There's potential to use rootstocks, although most of the rootstocks that have been used in hazelnut production increase the vigor, such as Turkish tree hazel. Also, we're really interested in growth regulators. So I know in Chile there's been some adoption of growth regulators to keep trees smaller. We have one called Kudos that we're trying to get registered for hazelnuts, but it's very effective at shutting down the shoot growth. So, for example, after green or spring pruning, a treatment with the growth regulator can really help us keep trees smaller for longer. So, just a shot of some of this demonstration that we're trying to show growers that when you prune in the winter, you get this vigorous response in the shoots, and you come back the next year, and you can almost not tell at all that any pruning was done because of the amount of vigor that returns to that plant canopy. So, trying to do some demonstrations showing how summer pruning can help reduce that vigor without getting that big vegetative burst of growth. So this is one of our research plots here looking at a high density of trees, and this is McDonald variety, but you can see there's just so many catkins. This can be a really productive high density configuration. So of course, when you're doing this kind of green or summer pruning, um, we really want to do this before bud differentiation starts to happen, which for us is sort of at the beginning of July. And we need a lot more work to better understand when the female flowers are starting to form for the next year's crop during the mid-season in order to better time our canopy management to reduce the vigor response, but not impact future nut crops. So we do have some research on those lines as well. When we're talking about hedging these canopies, one way to think about it, as we've sort of discussed earlier in this talk, is the light penetration, and maybe we should be shaping trees in different ways to better intercept the light. So we've been doing some trial work with that, including using some models to show different levels of sunlight harvesting by the orchard in different configurations. So this is a typical type of hedging bar hedger that we're using in some of these orchards to manage these canopies. So this is in Yamhill, and at this site where you can see where in the spring we're taking a little bit off of the tips of this orchard, mainly just to maintain the access. And so one of the things that we're trying to model also is how tall can we let this canopy get before it starts to shade each other, the rows start to shade each other out, and so we would start to lose production. So this is a very active area of research for us. Well, you can see if you don't do anything, the trees are going to rapidly grow together, especially Yamhill with its low configuration. It can make the orchard impenetrable, and so the growers have to do something to maintain the access. And so we are very interested to see what kind of yield impacts that we are going to get from these different hedging configurations. So, okay, so I got a little bit out of order here. So again, in our mature orchards, again, the pruning and the canopy management is a really big job because eventually they get so shady that most of the nut production is at the very top of the orchard, and you're not getting a lot of nuts produced down low unless you're opening up that canopy. So a different style of hedger is typically used to open up these mature canopies as well with spinning saw blades. And you can see how growers are using this in different ways and trying to get more light down into the lower canopy. and also is become part of our Eastern filbert blight management strategy as well. Okay, moving on from canopy management, I just wanted to talk really quickly about our nutrient management guidelines. So, for many, many years, growers relied on leaf tissue samples taken in August to determine the nutrient status of the tree. And there's a long history of how these critical values came about. So basically, you have your leaf analyzed and you compare your nutrient levels to these critical values that are ideal nutrient levels for the plant to have at that time. So a lot of this research was done a long time ago, and so a big impetus in my program has been to sort of see if we can update some of these guidelines for nutrient management. So, historically, when these were developed, we were growing Barcelona. There's no irrigation, and now Barcelona is just a minor component of the total acres. We're mostly growing these new hazelnut varieties, and of course, there's information to suggest that different genetics have different nutritional needs as well. So we are trying to look at that. Also, now that we have irrigated orchards, a lot more growers are adopting fertigation practices for their fertility instead of using dry fertilizer. And in addition to leaf tissue sampling, a lot of growers now are using sap analysis to more quickly see the results of their fertilizer applications. Um, we typically take a leaf from the middle of a shoot and not one that is near a nut cluster. So one of the things that we've been trying to figure out is what is the demand for different nutrients in different parts of the tree at different parts of the season. And for example, if you take leaves that are near leaf clusters compared to leaves that are away from nut clusters, you can sort of determine what nutrients are being pulled out of the leaves into the nuts. So we're trying to understand more what that demand looks like. And then when we're looking at our critical values, we are trying to model them over the whole season. So I told you that traditionally we took our sample in August, which is this gray bar on this plot, is that August window. And you can see how potassium, which is plotted here, it's declining pretty rapidly during August. So depending on when you took that sample, you're going to get different results on your tissue testing. And so we want this model, which you can see that the x-axis is based on cumulative degree days. So this helps account for seasonal differences and where the nutrient status of the plant would be in different seasons because of the accumulation of heat units. Hmm. Um, Boron is a really important one for us. So most of our growers are putting on a foliar boron application in the spring, and this does increase nut set for us. And we don't think that boron is very mobile at all. You may be familiar that boron is mobile in some plants, but not others. And so we think that hazelnut is similar to pistachio and walnut in that the boron is not very mobile. And therefore, when we do foliar applications in spring to support the fertilization period, we can get a boost in yield. And so most of our growers are doing that. Something that I'm trying to help growers understand is how much nutrition is coming off of the orchard with your harvest. So, a nut is comprised of about 3 to 5% nutrients, and nitrogen, potassium, calcium are the dominant nutrients found in the nuts. And so, based on the percentages that they are accounting for in your harvest, you can very easily calculate how much nutrient you're getting pulled off with your harvest that needs to be at least replaced for the orchard to sustain production. So, as we know, hazelnuts tend toward biennial bearing. A lot of that has to do with the nutritional budget of the tree. Really quick in the last couple of minutes here, I just wanted to talk briefly about sort of our major insect pests that we have to manage. And a big one for us is filberworm. This is a native tortricid moth that attacks the nuts directly. I read recently that brown marmorated stink bug, Haliomorpha hales, is now present in Chile. And as you know, this has been a pretty bad pest for us in Oregon, but it's been devastating in Turkey and Republic of Georgia on hazelnuts. So this is a really bad one for hazelnuts. We've had it since around 2004. We have effective insecticides, um, but that's not a good solution. So the insecticides we have to use are broad spectrum types of materials that can be very disruptive. So we don't like to use them, but they are effective. Besides these guys, we have aphids, we have a bunch of boring insects as well. So just a shot of brown marmorated stink bug and sort of the damage that it can cause to the nuts. We've been trying to redistribute this parasitoid that attacks the stink bug eggs and having some success getting this wasp established. However, it does not seem to be having a huge effect on the stink bugs. We also, this just shows some of the other more standard pests that are really common around the world on hazelnuts. Another new recent one are these Prionis borers, which I think is similar to something in Chile that maybe you call burrito, but this is a soil inhabiting grub that attacks the roots. That's been pretty bad in the last few years. Of course, we have the classic European species of aphids, both the hazelnut and the filbert aphid. Of diseases, we talked a little bit about Eastern filbert blight, but bacterial blight is a big one for us too. This is kind of a mysterious disease that sometimes has devastating impacts, especially on young trees. So most of our growers are putting on a copper spray every fall for bacterial blight. We have recently discovered some issues with fungal trunk diseases, and root rot problems can be an issue on the heavier types of soils. Not really common though. This year, though, we discovered this new problem. So, this disease, hazelnut bud rot, caused by the pathogen Cryptosporiopsis tarraconensis, was first described in Spain, and it causes the death of fruiting buds, and the fungus lives very well in the catkins as well and spreads from the catkins. And the result of this is a major impact on yield in nut production. And we are still learning about this. This was the first year that we realized this is a real problem, but we've been trying to figure this out for years. Basically, in the springtime, we see canopies that are very thin and have a lot of dead shoots. So I realize I just covered a lot of material. I believe I used my time about half an hour I had there. So I'm happy to take any questions if I have time. And I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Nick. I don't know if you can hear the applauses. Nick,
No,
can you hear me?
I hear you. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Nick, well, vamos a tener para preguntas. Jorge Moore will help us with the technicalities of questions in case we need his help. He will be
Okay.
translating questions in case there's any. ¿Alguna pregunta del público? ¿Las podemos traducir simultáneamente para Nick? ¿Preguntas? Ahí hay una pregunta. ¿Pregunta?
Sí, me gustaría saber en términos comerciales cómo es la comercialización del avellano, de las avellanas en Estados Unidos. Aquí en Chile hay prácticamente un gran comprador. Me gustaría saber cómo es en Estados Unidos y también me gustaría saber si se aprecia desde el punto de vista de mercado un aumento de la demanda por las grandes industrias de los dulces en Estados Unidos.
I think I can translate that. Francisco here asks if how can you describe the marketing or the commercial development of the hazelnut in United States, we in Chile have one big buyer who is Ferrero that buys almost 90% of the production in Chile. How is this compared to the American experience? Francisco, la segunda parte de la pregunta no la recuerdo.
Si se aprecia un aumento de la demanda de avellana en el
Ya.
mercado de los dulces y confites en Estados Unidos.
Perfecto. The second question that Francisco asks is if there's an augmentation in the demand of the hazelnuts in America due to the market of candy and other products that use the hazelnut.
Okay. Thank you, Francisco. Good questions. It's very interesting. When we were mainly a industry that grew Barcelona, our main market was Asia for in-shell nuts. However, the last in-shell variety that was released was Jefferson, and it's been widely planted, but it also can be suitable for the kernel market. It is amazing that our industry has pivoted in the last 5, 10 years to almost exclusively to kernels now, which of course is how the world markets work. And a lot of that is due to the foresight of our hazelnut breeder, Sean Mellenbacher. He was really providing us varieties that were good for the Blanche kernel market. And the US is still a net importer of hazelnut kernels for our food products, largely buying cheap kernels from Turkey. And there's a lot of history there that goes back even to World War II. But it is difficult for us sometimes to compete with Turkish imports because they can be very cheap. However, yes, so our buyers are fairly diverse. It's changing quite a bit. You'll see a lot more hazelnut products on the shelves in American grocery stores than you used to. So the food companies do have quite a big demand. Ferrero is also very important for us. I think they're in the neighborhood of buying around 50% of our crop. Don't quote me on that, but it is a lot. They are our largest buyer. They have a plant in Canada and one in Mexico that use Oregon hazelnuts. And for example, their product Nutella is very popular in the United States. And my understanding is it's mostly made with Oregon hazelnuts. So they have been a big buyer for us. There are some challenges there. They are very slow to accept our varieties. So, for example, Yamhill has been accepted, but some of the others have not yet. So, they are a big buyer of certain varieties. And otherwise, we're in the same markets that you are. We're looking at Europe. We see, I think, India as an up-and-coming market. And like you, we hope that worldwide demand for hazelnuts will continue to increase. This year, we're looking at good pricing for the first time in several years, largely due to the freeze that happened in Turkey this spring. Hopefully, I answered the question.
Yeah, I have a question. No sé si hay otra pregunta del público. Acá hay una pregunta.
Hi, Nick. Martin Silva here. You
Hey,
did
Martin.
some investigation related to the use of Etephone as a way to concentrate the harvest. Could you summarize it, please, for us?
Okay. Yeah, so this is for those that don't know, Ethafon is a plant growth regulator that's through a chain of reactions. It basically results in ethylene production, promotes the ripening of the nuts, and as I know farm sizes are very large in Chile. We have a few larger farms now here too, and it can be a real challenge for growers to get all across all their orchards and have efficient hazelnut harvests. So we were looking at Ethafon to promote earlier drop of the nuts, and it can be very effective. It has some challenges. So essentially, you want to apply it about 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks before you plan to harvest. And it can definitely accelerate the nut drop. Where you have to be cautious is that it will also accelerate ripening of leaves. So if you have a stressed orchard, it can exacerbate the stress by bringing down leaves and even some catkins. But for most healthy orchards, it seems to be very safe. And we looked at a wide range of rates and we found very good success with lower rates, which I would typically recommend to our growers, not going with the high rates that are on the label, because a little bit can be pretty effective. We have a problem with it here in the United States in that our label does not give us a lot of flexibility on when we can apply it versus our pre-harvest interval, essentially. So we do have some regulatory issues that we're trying to address with that label because I think most growers that have used it, they've liked it. It is a useful tool. I also caution that here in the US, the label has a danger signal word on it, which could cause problems maybe with MRLs for exported nuts, perhaps if they're testing for residues. So there's, it's kind of a mixed bag, but I'm cautiously optimistic that it can be a helpful tool, especially for these bigger growers.
Última pregunta, ahí, sí. No,
Hi, Nick.
ahí sí.
Manuel Monti here. In the irrigation study,
Yes.
the high treatment and the medium treatment didn't show any difference.
Mhm.
How many cubic meters of water per hectare were those treatments around?
I would say that's a good question. So they're based on a weekly calculation, and I think it adds up to about a meter per season. I think the reason they didn't show a difference, so they're based on observed evapotranspiration percentages, and the high was 150%, so above the observed evapotranspiration. The medium was 100, and then the low is 50%. And in some cases, the low is almost as effective as the high, and there's really no difference between the high and the medium. And I think what this is showing is that as you probably know, hazelnuts are really averse to drought stress, and I think we're showing that irrigation is very beneficial. However, its impact is fairly limited because a problem is when we have high vapor pressure deficit, when the air is very dry and it's pulling water hard on the trees, they tend to shut down. And so we're a goal is to, increase the time of active photosynthetic activity of the trees because in the midsummer when we are having these hot, dry days, the trees are only very photosynthetically active for the morning hours. Then they start to shut down in the afternoon. So I think a key for increasing production is going to have to be trying to keep the photosynthesis more active. But we have quite a bit of different avenues of irrigation research going on, and trying to get a better handle on that to make standard recommendations for growers.
Well, thank you very much, Nick, for your presentation, for your disposition, for the questions. We will now continue with our schedule. So, démosle una ronda de aplauso nuevamente a Nick, por favor. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much, Nick.
Gracias.
Hope to see you soon here in Chile.
Yes. You'll see me in February, I hope. Thank you.
Ya, muchas gracias,
Bye.
Nick. Bueno, y para continuar con la